Coming up on this week's podcast, has Lando Norris proved his doubters wrong with F1 title glory? Did Max Verstappen need a wingman in Abu Dhabi? And was Oscar Piastri actually given a fair shot at going for the title in the season finale? It's time for the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. And welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking back at last weekend's season-ending, title-deciding Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by the dynamic duo, that is 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Coop, and the man, the myth, the almighty legend, still out in Abu Dhabi. It is, of course, lead editor Ian Parks. I'm going to get out there straight away. We are recording this a few hours post-Grand Prix, so it's Sunday evening for Sam and I. For Ian, it technically is a Monday recording because it is, what time, Ian?
10 to 1 in the morning.
There you go. So it is a very early Monday morning recording for Ian. It's also quite interesting because we're going in.
I was going to say, and the reason why we are recording is because I'm boarding a plane to go home in just 9 hours time. So I'm not going to get too much sleep before I have to get on that plane. So if we can't wait until I land, basically, folks. So that's why we're doing it, for me, in the very early hours of Monday.
It's quite interesting because it's very early Monday morning for Ian. It's coming up to, kind of night time for Sam in the UK. And then it's coming up to the evening for me in Brazil because obviously I'm still out here. Cool. Haven't flown back yet from Sao Paulo. So that's quite cool. We're in three different continents.
3 different time zones. Yeah.
Before we get on, Ian, I'll come to you first. Obviously, it was the title decider. It wasn't quite the race we were hoping for, but that's happened several times at the Yas Marina circuit. Nevertheless, Lando Norris, world champion. What was the kind of the vibe like, the atmosphere on the grid ahead of the Grand Prix afterwards? Can you give, the fans, those listening or watching, a bit of a sense of what it was like on the ground at the circuit?
It was, beforehand, it was excitement because we'd got the grid that we were really hoping for. With Max on pole, Lando second, Oscar third, you've got the top three, the title protagonists in the top three positions on the grid, and in particular, Max on pole to really try and shake things up. And the excitement on Saturday evening post-qualifying was palpable. The excitement in the paddock throughout the day, in the build-up to the Grand Prix getting underway, was immense. It was heaving. It was as busy a paddock as I have seen for quite some time. And you can imagine around the big teams, at the top end of the paddock, you had McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes, quite naturally, in Constructors' Championship order from last season. And it was literally heaving with people just wanting to be there, VIPs, media, dignitaries. We even had, for the British audience, Nigel Farage there, which was
different.
Very different indeed. Won't go into too much detail as to who Nigel is. British politician, quite a controversial British politician, it has to be said as well in some respects, but he was amongst the people there. And as I say, just host of celebrities, etc., etc. So the vibe was fantastic. And as I say, you could sense this excitement building. As media, we just couldn't wait to get it going because obviously we'd had all the build-up over the course of the past week, stemming from, of course, the strategy faux pas by McLaren in Qatar that led to this, as I say, week-long build-up into this triple title, 3 title challenges going for this crown that we've not had for quite some, since 2010, the last one, of course. And yeah, we just couldn't wait to now finally get it underway. And then it just didn't quite zing, did it really? But we're going to get into that now, folks.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing, Sam, isn't it? Very quickly before we get on with things, is the Yas Marina circuit. It looks amazing. It has such an amazing atmosphere. The fireworks, the lights, it's so spectacular. But as we've seen for the majority of the time it's been on the F1 calendar, not a particularly good track for Formula One racing.
No, it often kind of simmers, but never quite comes to boil. It flirts with having a really entertaining race. There has good elements to it, but it doesn't quite fully deliver. And so as a season finale, it hasn't quite ever brought exactly the kind of excitement or drama or, natural controversy, shall we say, to caveat that.
With the exception of 2021,
well navigated.
Natural, organic, corn-fed controversy, in the same way that somewhere like an Interlagos has. And we waxed lyrical about Interlagos after the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, and those points still ring true. And in fact, they're kind of almost amplified when you then have a title decider like we had this evening that just didn't quite, as I said, come to boil. It had those ingredients, but you just didn't bake it into something that was kind of edible or delicious, to serve up. And that's a bit of a shame.
Do you want to go into any more eating puns, Sam? You've through about 5 in one sentence. Right.
I'm all good. But yeah, I stand by the fact that I think the circuit has been improved by the changes that were made kind of, I think it was pre-2021, but it still hasn't quite delivered. We look at 2010, there were elements of that race that were fascinating. Fernando, taking the wrong strategy, getting stuck behind Vitaly Petrov. That was great, but ultimately it was a bit of a dud of a race. And it's the same here. The tension was there throughout because, as we have said all season long, all it takes is one reliability error or issue when you get to a season finale. So there was always that jeopardy lingering there for Lando Norris or even Max or Oscar. But there wasn't that same level of kind of drama that you would really, really want from at least a three-way title decider.
Yeah, of course, we have so much to discuss, but it would not be a Racing News 365 podcast without doing a fun question to get us going. And it's to do this week with a farewell for Formula One in regard to DRS. Unfortunately, it has come, it has gone, it will not be seen again. Well, who knows, maybe it will be seen again in several years' time. You never know.
In the post-season test in 3 days' time? 2 days' time?
Well, okay, in terms of... Always, Sam. In terms of a race format, every time we will not see DRS again. So, interestingly, Kimi Antonelli was the last driver to use DRS in Sunday's Grand Prix. My question to you two: who was the first driver to activate DRS in the 2011 Australian Grand Prix, the first race that, of course, featured the overtaking system?
Good Lord.
This is contested.
It is
contested on Racing News 365 social media this evening.
Oh, you've seen it. That's annoying. Okay, so Sam knows. So Sam can stay quiet. Ian, any guesses?
Nah, just let Sam get on with it. Might as well. He's looking smart.
Sam.
Oh, there we go.
No, I've just checked Instagram. That's literally it. There's nothing to talk about. I've literally just been on my phone. That's all. So the record book kind of shows that it was Jenson Button. However, that is contested. The suggestion is that, in fact, it was Fernando Alonso who first used DRS, but it wasn't picked up at the time, and it was on broadcast that they saw Jenson Button do it, so that it has been potentially erroneously given to Jenson Button. But yeah, as I said, the suggestion is that actually it was Fernando Alonso.
So I'm giving Alonso the win for that because he deserves one. Bless him. It's been a long year for him. Right, it's also been a long year for us. So, Ian, I'll come to you first, mate. What was your biggest takeaway from the final race of what has been a very, very long season?
Biggest takeaway? I guess bottom line is we have to go with Lando. He's taken quite some flack throughout the course of his career. Some of it rightly, the majority of it wrongly, simply because of who he is as a character, as a person, for a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve, who says what he thinks, who puts himself out there. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, whatever the mood, whatever the mistake, whatever the joy that he might be feeling, he always lays it on the line. And we know that Lando has admitted himself to mental issues. It's nothing now uncommon with high-profile sports people who've come out and expressed these feelings and thoughts that they have been experiencing and going through. And I think Lando takes a lot of unfair stick for being as honest as he always has been. And I think it's been the case this season as well, where he has faced such criticism, particularly over that first half, when he wasn't quite at one with the car. He was struggling with it, struggling to get the best out of it. Oscar was most definitely doing a better job, especially after the Australian Grand Prix. Yes, Lando won the Australian. Oscar had the issue, as we know, where he got beached in the grass and was running second but finished ninth. And after that, it then started to quickly become Oscar's championship. He was the more cooler, calmer, collected guy, phrases that we've used on this podcast and our updates on many occasions. And it seemed like Lando was really struggling to get to grips with some of the little mistakes that he was making. And in making those little mistakes, he was expressing his thoughts and feelings about them, and he was taking stick for it, unfairly in my book. Yet he has managed to turn his season around. He has seemed to have turned a corner in doing that, and he has come out the other side. And you would hope that... I spoke to David Coulthard afterwards, after the Grand Prix, and I asked David what this victory would do for Lando. Would it change him as a person? Because he's finally got this kind of monkey off his back. We know he's always had the ability to be a championship contender, and yes, okay, he's had a great car this year, but all drivers, for the most part, need a great car beneath them at the end of the day. And David turned around and said that it probably won't. Because of the personality and character that Lando is, he will probably still go about on occasion beating himself up when something goes wrong. And simply because that's who Lando is. Yes, it will help him with his confidence, quite obviously. But bottom line is, it will more than likely still be the same Lando that we have seen over these past few years going forward into next season. So for me, the bottom line is, okay, we had this great championship build-up, and as I discussed in the update, Nick, it would have been fantasy land if a dream scenario for the championship if Max Verstappen had won it, given the comeback. But bottom line, Lando Norris is a worthy world champion this season for me.
Yeah, and I'll build on that, because I'll put my hands up when it comes to doubters. I remember it was our summer break podcast, and we said who thinks he'll win the title, and I argued. I said I do not believe Lando will do it, because I do not believe he has the mentality to do it, the ability to control his emotions, control his nerves. And I did say then that I will eat my own words and I'll put my hand up and apologise. And I do believe, as I said in my intro, I think he has proven his doubters wrong. He's proven that, and it's particularly since the summer break, that he can deal with the pressure. You look at the season finale, and there was, despite not being the best of races, so many opportunities there for Lando to feel nervous, to make a mistake. He did a brilliant overtake at turn 6 on 2 cars. Yes, okay, he had a tire advantage, but a lunge like that is something I don't think an older version of Lando from maybe the start of the season last year would have potentially gone for, because of the risk that was involved. Even on Yuki Tsunoda, yes, okay, Yuki was weaving left, right and centre, but Lando going off the circuit, forced off there, of course, as the stewards pointed out, but nevertheless keeping that throttle wide open to get the move done. That was a really ballsy move for Lando to do. And I think it has shown that, he has proven his doubters wrong, and there is certainly being a mentality switch in him. And I completely agree. I think he's still going to have these lapses at times when things don't go his way, because I think that is just his personality. That is just the person he is. And I don't think the team help at times, because it's interesting when you look at social media. And Lando does receive quite a lot of negativity. And the way I see it is, I think that so much of it is actually created by the team and has nothing to do with Lando or something Lando's done. For example, you look back to Monza and of course the pit stop. That was the team's mistake. It was the team who then asked Oscar to give Lando the position. Yet it was Lando who received the majority of the criticism and on the online flack. There's been so many scenarios which have been created. Even you look at Singapore, yes, okay, it was Lando's move, and obviously made contact with Max and Oscar. It was the team's decision not to tell Lando to give the place back. The FIA agreed, and there's little things that I think it's Lando's then very easily targeted by the media, by fans online who particularly don't like him, and I think he's dealt with it so well, and as a result, he is the world champion. He's the guy who scored the most points, whether you like him or dislike him. He is the one who has won the title because he has done the best job across the entire season. Sam, for you, your biggest takeaway?
I think, first of all, both of those are kind of beautifully put, and I completely echo the thoughts that Lando is a worthy champion. I think any three of them would have been a worthy champion. And
there is that as well. That's absolutely right. You've got that spot on.
And I think what's going to be really interesting to see with Lando is, he's got over that bump now. He's got over the hump, and what that will then do for him, how he'll be able to encounter these situations in similar scenarios moving forward. But for me, my biggest takeaway was really that, there's going to be a post-mortem over Papaya Rules, or kind of what they've become to symbolise over the coming weeks, over the coming years, because, some will argue that this was a validation of that approach. I think you can make a very fair argument that in some ways it made it far more difficult, and actually they won in spite of Papaya Rules, not because of it, or at least Lando won the title in spite of it, not because of Papaya Rules. And that trial by media that we've had for the last season will go on and on and on. And ultimately that is our job. That is, the job of the people around F1 to scrutinise those approaches and kind of ask those difficult questions and see why things don't work and why certain teams tackle certain situations in different ways. But this evening, McLaren won as a team. They put Oscar on the hard tyre, knowing that whilst he was still able to fight for his own championship, his own destiny, that would create strategic problems for Max and Red Bull. They knew that would, basically prevent Max from being able to back the pack up, at least early on. And it was a very, very clever use of having two drivers. It was pre-planned. It was in part to help Lando as well. And also the move that Oscar made on Lando at turn 9 on lap 1, whilst it wasn't a exact plan, as Lando said, it was something the team had discussed, and that was echoed by Andrea and Zach after the race, that it was something they'd spoken about. So they were very much thinking about how can we use having two drivers in this fight to our advantage, where at times it has been to our detriment. And they got it right. They did everything they needed to do. And it was won as a team ultimately, and Lando said that, Andrea Stella, Zach Brown said that, and I'm sure Oscar would very much echo those thoughts. I haven't heard him speak about that specifically yet, but I think that really should be championed, that they got it right today when it really, really mattered. That it wasn't just Lando, and he delivered a champion's drive. He was fantastic working through the field, but it was the whole team that helped get over the line.
Yeah, Lando is obviously the 2025 Formula One world champion. Speaking of champions, we of course need to do, or should I say, look back, somehow already nearly 90 minutes into this podcast, at our predictions from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and the Racing News 365 Predictions Championship. Of course, the title was already won by Ian back in Qatar, because he has been just unstoppable this season. We'll have that in the headline of the podcast, Unstoppable Parks wins title. It was a very interesting, though, weekend.
People will click on that.
Well, who knows? I mean, there's only one way to find out.
Let's give it a go.
It was a very interesting weekend in regard to myself, Sam, and the fans. The fans were, of course, represented by Linda from Scotland, who picked up 3 points for correctly saying Max Verstappen would get pole position. Ian, you got 2 points. You got Verstappen in second. Of course, he won. And based on our system, if you predict a driver in a certain position, but they finish one above or below said position, then you get 1 point. And you also got Oscar in third. Of course, he finished second. The same rule applies, so 2 points for you. I only got 1 point. I said Oscar would win. He finished second. That's it. And also, just so you know, it was Ferrari with the fastest pit stop, 2 seconds for Charles Leclerc. Sam, you got 9 points because you got Verstappen, Piastri, and Norris all in the correct order in the top 3. And I cannot believe I'm saying this, and it's to the point I kind of want to end the podcast now. Is that obviously yes? Ian won the Racing News 365 Predictors Championship on 140 points. In second, for the first time this year, he has saved it till last, is Sam on 114 points. I don't know where you've done that from.
I feel like Michael Massey has the hands on the scales. Honestly, here.
The fans finished in third on 112, which means for the first time this season, and I literally left it till the worst time, I finished in last on 110 points. I did some research, and Sam has been in last of our Predictors Championship for 75% of the season, and somehow he has come through to finish in second. I mean, Sam, any words?
I was literally about to say I have no words. To quote Oscar Piastri after the Qatar Grand Prix, I'm speechless. I have no words.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a long season. You lose more than you win, and I got lucky, but it was close throughout. Really. So it could have been anyone in second. Really
close.
You are the Oscar Piastri of this championship, because obviously we built up so much the prospect of the third place driver in this year's Drivers' Championship, that being Oscar, going into this race, potentially going on and winning the title, as we saw in 2010 and 2007. And you've come from fourth to second. Okay, you've not won the championship, but you have managed to salvage something from this season, Sam, by going from fourth, where you've been for the majority of the time, through to second. Hello, Mr. Oscar Piastri of the Racing News 365 desk.
I also mentioned that I have also been spoiling one of my votes all year, or most of the year, by saying that Yuki Tsunoda will finish 10th. So
Hold on. Spoiling. Are you trying to tell me you've not believed that Yuki's going to finish 10th in every race? Have you been doing this, Sam, all year just to be funny?
I wouldn't say... Oh, Nick, the length that I would go to be funny. Let that not read too much into anything psychological. But obviously, it became kind of a bit of a running joke. But yeah, I mean, also Yuki, he did qualify 10th, so I'm also going to take that as a kind of somewhat of a moral victory as well.
Doesn't count. Sorry.
No,
I just can't wait to see. I just can't wait to see who Sam's going to predict in 10th for the first race of 2026. It's going to be a different name, and it's then myself picking up the wooden spoon. Well,
I was just about to say, Nick, the wooden spoon is in the post, mate. So,
Nick, thank you very much. Yeah, I get the wooden spoon. Ian gets the golden crown. And of course, thank you to all 24 fans that have also been randomly selected this year for representing the fans in the Prediction Championship. It will be returning in 2026. I don't know why, because Ian's just going to walk it again, but it's been quite good fun. So it will be back in 2026.
Depends if you do a major regulation change, Nick, and shake up, the rules, and who knows?
Well, I will have a think. If anybody watching this on YouTube in the comments has a good idea for anything we should add to our Predictors game, let us know. We'll have a look. We've got some time to sort it. Not a lot of time, because the new season will be here sooner rather than later. Right, we have already been going for 24 minutes, and we've, of course, got to discuss the 3 drivers who were our title contenders. We'll get on to Max Verstappen, we'll get on to Oscar Piastri, but rightly so, we've got to start with the new world champion, Lando Norris. And Ian, as we've already discussed a little bit, that the big thing with Lando was, the big thing with Lando is, he was ultimately the driver in Abu Dhabi who had everything to lose. And ultimately, I think there was probably a lot of people actually expecting him to mess up in some way, given the areas we've seen from him, as recently as only a few, this season in Qatar, for example, in qualifying. He's proven doubters wrong here, hasn't he? This is actually, yes, he's won the title, but in terms of a personal statement that Lando's made, this is massive for not only, him now, but actually his future as well.
Yeah, and I asked a lot of people, media, other drivers, ex-drivers, shall we say, who milling about in the paddock, and just having a brief chat with them, and who they thought was going to win, as in the title. And pretty much to a man, everybody was thinking Max, because Max had been on this charge. Leo, good grief, Lando looked a little bit fragile. He was quite tetchy in the press conference post-qualifying, and you saw him in the garage in the build-up, in the hour build-up to the Grand Prix, and I sent some images across that went on our blog, and he looked quite nervous. There was one picture actually where it looked like he got his hands together praying, but it actually was just like he got his hand over his mouth. It was quite a funny one, but it looked, he was sat down, and it very much reminded me of Lewis Hamilton of 2007. And I mentioned this previously, was when I was in Brazil that year, and watching Lewis go through the pressure that seemingly was weighing upon him at that particular time. He looked a nervous character, did Lewis. And in many respects, when I saw Lando today, there were shades of that. Even an old photographer friend of mine, he got the same picture as I had, and he felt exactly the same thing, because he'd been in Brazil that year as well. And he saw the same thing with Lewis that I saw back then, that we were both seeing with Lando on Sunday. But Lando rose above it, in fairness to him, and we've obviously discussed quite in depth earlier on, and a major talking point from the Grand Prix about the different kind of Lando. And in fairness to him, when it came down to the deciding moments of that Grand Prix, he delivered. Okay, yes, Oscar Piastri overtook him on lap one. We all thought at the time, whoa, this is game on. Little did we know, although Zach Brown gave a hint when he did a Sky F1 interview, that perhaps it was a little bit orchestrated. And as we discovered after the Grand Prix, given the comments from Andrea especially, that yes, it was something that had come up in conversation. So it wasn't as brilliant a move as it initially appeared at the time on screen. But nevertheless, after that, Lando settled down, came under a little bit of pressure from Charles Leclerc, and after that first round of pit stops unfolded, and it did pitch him back into the pack, we saw the talented Lando that we've got to know over the course of this season, and has ultimately delivered. Some superb overtakes, yes, a tyre offset, but nevertheless still had to deliver. And as you and I discussed in the update, Nick, that move with Yuki Tsunoda, with Yuki forcing him off track, it was brave, it was ballsy. It could have ended up in an absolute disaster, but Lando, credit to him, pulled it off. And it was probably the defining moment of the Grand Prix, because as I say, it could have very easily gone another way, and we would have been talking about a whole different scenario than we are right now. So again, we'll give our credit to Lando where it is due at the end of the day.
It's funny, isn't it? Because if we go back to the season open in Australia, and before the lights went out for the first time, and amongst all the bookies, Lando was the clear favourite for the title, yet come the end of the year, it's been so close, 3 drivers, just 2 points in the end. Sam, the thing that I'm really fascinated about now with Lando is, he's now we'll be going into 2026 as the reigning world champion. We of course can't sit here and say, oh, he's won this title, he's now going to be unbeatable in 2026, because we know nothing about 2026, because it's the biggest regulation change in F1 history. But the one thing that we probably can guarantee is that Lando's going to have a newfound confidence, this newfound, maybe side to him, because it's going to give him a bit of swagger, maybe, that he is one of those few drivers to have won a Formula One world title. A lot comes with that, more than just the trophy.
Absolutely. There you go. I almost tried to back out. I tried to back out of that one, but I had to commit at the end. I was like, I've gone halfway through it. I need to see it through.
Finish the season with one break. Come on, that's perfect.
The biggest thing for Lando will be that he will not feel and he's never really given the impression of someone who feels he needs to prove something to other people. But he will know that he is now a world champion. He has proven that, and that he can take on track in every single difficult moment or aspect he has to navigate, knowing that he has been through it. A three-way battle, really tense, these horrible moments, like as Ian mentioned, the battle with Yuki Tsunoda, and he prevailed, and he will be able to take solace and confidence from that, and know that, look, I just need to deliver, I just need to execute, and it will make all of those things that feel so much more overwhelming and so much more complex when you're trying to grasp something that feels so elusive. Because he has now captured that, it just makes it so much more simple, so much more straightforward. And that will be what ultimately is that added ingredient, that little bit extra that he'll be able to take into seasons gone by. And we saw it in, during the race with that Yuki Tsunoda incident. There wasn't any kind of, as far as I remember, there wasn't any kind of, oh, what's he doing? He didn't lose his head. He just kept on going. He just head down. I know what I need to do. I'm fully focused. Wasn't distracted by, the perfectly fair gamesmanship in terms of, I say that, it's a bit of obviously an oxymoron, but I say fair gamesmanship because we knew that Red Bull or Yuki, we knew they would do stuff. Yes, obviously Yuki, took it outside the rules and he was deserving of his penalty, but we knew that Lando would at some point likely encounter that second Red Bull and have to get past. But he did it, he navigated it in the exact way he needed to. And that's the Lando that you can expect from now on. I completely agree with you, Nick. He will still have those moments. He will still have those times where he's not comfortable or completely confident in the car, and he'll push a little bit too far, as we saw at times earlier in the year. But what he has learned over the course of the year, one of those things being that actually sometimes being at 95% is good enough. He will take that moving forward, and that will make him a better driver. That will make him someone who can take the fight to Max, Oscar, George, Charles, Lewis, whoever it might be that he could be fighting against next season.
Well, let's move on to the driver who is always at 110%. In fact, I should have said 100. I should have said 104% because Max came so close here. From 104 points adrift after Zandvoort to just being 2 adrift come the end of the year. We all, in our podcast and the F1 updates, were saying, no, you can never rule it out. It's Max, but 104 points was a ridiculous margin. It was the equivalent of effectively, it was Oscar leading at the time. Oscar not finishing 4 races, Max winning all 4, and Oscar would still have a 4-point buffer come after that. It was, it was unthinkable, mathematically possible, but unthinkable that it was ever going to be on. Max had a perfect weekend in Abu Dhabi, claimed pole, claimed the victory, won comfortably, as we've discussed, couldn't back the field up because of the clever game that it was McLaren who played in the end rather than Max playing the game. And it's funny how actually we spoke about in the F1 update on post-qualifying that one of Max's biggest advantages could be that it's him with 1 Red Bull against 2 McLarens. We saw that, if anything, that was his biggest disadvantage because of the way things played out. Has this been proof, though, that, we saw Red Bull try and use Yuki pretty unsuccessfully, did that compared to obviously what Checo did, Sergio Perez in 2021. But is this proof once again that, Red Bull has got to make sure it has, yes, of course, Max Verstappen, but a second driver who maybe isn't able to win races, compete for consistent podiums, but is able to be there to support Max when needed? Because if Yuki was in the top 5, personally, let's say, would have made such a difference.
Wasn't even top 5. Even if he'd managed to split the McLarens on the grid, and had started 3rd ahead of Oscar, for argument's sake, that would have made a huge difference. But Red Bull hasn't had a second driver for goodness knows when, and is Isaac Hadjar the man to be that second driver? There's a lot of faith in him. That's absolutely for certain. And he's shown on occasion this season that he could be the real deal. I still think that is a raw diamond right now. And whilst we have seen some great things from him over the course of this season, he's still going to need an awful lot of polishing. That your only upside for Isaac next season is that at least he and Max go into that season on as much of a level playing field as possible. Obviously, yes, Max has been there all this period of time, but I'm talking about the car. Max has had this car beneath him. It's been developed for Max. It's been developed around Max more than the second driver. And Red Bull have always been willing, throughout Max's time predominantly and more recently than in the earlier years, to have that car built around Max to the detriment of its second driver, and allowing its second driver to struggle because they want that car for Max. And it's allowed him to win his 4 world titles and come within 2 points of what would have been a record equaling 5th consecutive title. That's how close he came. We know that. And as I said, hopefully with Isaac, Red Bull is getting the second driver that it really needs, because it cannot continue to go through these seasons with just wholly relying on Max Verstappen to get the majority of the points. It needs that second driver, and today was a classic example where if it had had a second driver in the fight, it would have made that Grand Prix scenario, that title chasing scenario, so very, very different. And McLaren would probably not have been able to play the strategic game that he did in placing Oscar on the hard tyre, Lando on the medium, and allowing Oscar to get ahead of Lando on that opening lap. And that ultimately dictated the way Red Bull had to go about its race. And rather than giving Max the opportunity to try and back the pack up and bring other drivers into play that could have attacked both McLarens, it just had to let Max go and run his own race and then hope for something very different to go on behind. We nearly had it. It wasn't too far away. Ferrari's Charles Leclerc did pressure Lando on occasion, but just didn't quite have enough. But that's Ferrari for you. That has been a case of Ferrari all season. They've never, ever quite had enough. And when Max needed a Ferrari to come to the fore today, it just wasn't there for him. That's part of the reason, a small part of the reason why he's ended up 2 points adrift.
It does feel a little bit as well, it's like a bit of an end of an era. It feels a little bit, obviously, Max's dominance coming to an end. He's going to lose the number 1. Will he go back to the 33? Will he change to the number 3? That's being speculated by Max himself. And even after the race, Sam, Red Bull Motorsport advisor Helmut Marko has, raised questions over his own future. Gianpiero Lambiase, Max's race engineer, was in tears after the race. Obviously, Honda as well, leaving Red Bull, they're going to be powering themselves in 2026. There's so much change. It does feel like going into 2026 now that it's a bit of a new era for Red Bull a little bit.
It's not a bit like it completely is. The powertrains, Honda leaving, Max, having to relinquish his crown. But you have to iterate, you have to evolve in order to remain competitive, in order to stay ahead of the fight. And that's actually where you could argue that Red Bull have struggled over the last few years, because they haven't been able to move away from this Max-centric approach, which, whilst it delivered titles when it had a dominant car, this year, Max could really have done with a teammate there alongside him to fight. And we would have had a completely different championship if that were the case. And I think the biggest difference that we will see is we are now in a Laurent Mekies era. This is the first off-season without Christian Horner that the team has ever experienced. And when we get to, Barcelona, when the teams get to Barcelona, and then when we all get to go to Bahrain for the test and then into the opening rounds, that blank sheet of paper, how are Red Bull going to build from that? Are they going to go down the same route that they've always gone and build a car in Max's image, in exactly how he wants? And that will be when you start, I would expect, to start to see Isaac struggle is when that car starts to be moved away from how he might want it to be in Max's direction, unless he can follow that and unless he can replicate how Max drives and be that missing, kind of piece that they haven't been able to find, that's when they'll start to struggle. Or will Laurent Mekies say, actually, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing it a different way. We have the opportunity. He said after the race that, you have to move forward. You have to look at these things. You have to review where you can improve as a team. And that was in response to kind of, the potential that Helmut Marko might step back, or, who knows if his role will change, but he certainly kind of, cast doubt on his future. Obviously, GP Lando Piastri, we're, hearing reports that he might have quite a different role moving forward. And that will be how well Red Bull can kind of, do that process, how much they can rebuild and how quickly, because that will also be key to keeping Max, is how quickly it can rebuild. Talking after the race, Nico Rosberg basically said that he will have his pick of whichever team in the paddock he wants to go to for 2027. He will basically go to the quickest car. And that there may be some truth in that. I don't think it's completely kind of on the money, but that's why Red Bull have to be so quick with this. The big thing for Red Bull, and the big thing that Laurent Mekies was saying, is that this season, how it has turned it around, gives it so much confidence in the tools, in the methodology that the team has in place, in those structures. And that is what they will take moving forward. And so, it's a huge off-season for Red Bull. And I think the key to that is how will Laurent Mekies lead that team forward? Will there be a change in approach in how it develops its car? And that could be crucial. Because ultimately, Max has proven he can do everything with anything. And we've seen that when he's had really bad cars. So will they turn around and say, Max, actually, we need a car that's a little bit less tuned in your favour, but you can still deliver championships that way?
I was just going to add that you get the sense that there is a major change going on inside Red Bull since the change of team principal with Christian leaving and Laurent coming in. And it was always going to be a case of that initial transition period, Red Bull moving away from the Christian era and Laurent slowly integrating himself in the team, implementing his ideas. And I really do get now towards the end of this season that team is evolving into something very different. We've definitely, I spoke to Raymond Vermeulen after the Grand Prix, Max's manager, and one of the points that I made to Raymond is that we seem to have a much happier Max Verstappen at the end of this season, even though he didn't win that 5th title, than we had at the start of the season, coming out of winning a 4th title. And he agreed with that point, that Max is very settled, is very happy with what he's seeing going on behind the scenes, with what Laurent is implementing, with the changes that he's making. It's now all going to be, of course, about the product that Red Bull is able to put on track next season. With these changes that are going on, that's great. It's Red Bull evolving into this new era that Sam has just talked about a little bit there. But the bottom line is the product going to be any good next year, particularly with the biggest change in Red Bull's history with its own power unit? Will it be able to compete with the big boys, Honda, Mercedes, Ferrari? That's going to be the acid test for Red Bull's future going forward, but also Max Verstappen's future beyond next season.
Only time will tell. There we go. And time is of the essence, and we do need to quickly discuss Oscar Piastri, because was he given a fair chance, Ian, do you feel, in the season finale? Of course, it was put on the different strategy, was used by McLaren to ensure that Max couldn't hold the pack up, obviously, in a way to help Lando. So was he given a fair shot? It was obviously, he was a massive outsider anyway, being 16 points adrift going into the race. But, was he given a fair chance, do you think?
Yeah, he was the massive outsider, as you say, 16 points. Yeah. And it was, it was a very convoluted set of permutations that was going to propel Oscar to become world champion that many of us thought coming out of that Dutch Grand Prix that he was going to go on to become. He didn't help himself, of course, by qualifying third. So that was another, that placed him even more on the back foot going into the Grand Prix. So it was a case of McLaren looking at its options and thinking, right, well, if we're going to try and give both drivers a relatively equal chance, what's the best thing that we can do with Oscar? Placing Oscar on exactly the same strategy as Lando with a medium tyre just was not it. So at least it gave itself, or the team gave themselves a roll of the dice with regard to Oscar and thought, let's see what comes to pass. You can't rule out incidents, retirements, safety cars, etc. There was always still that possibility at any stage during that Grand Prix, but it was just unfortunately one of those where it just meandered on once we got past that, certainly that initial pit stop phase. And yes, whilst Oscar did a brilliant stint on that hard tyre before ultimately changing very late on, by that stage, it really was going to take an almighty miracle for anything to happen because the die had pretty much been cast by that point. There was nothing really that was playing in Oscar's favour. So from my perspective, the fact that he was 16 points down, the fact that he qualified third, it really left McLaren with very little option to do something different with Oscar. It played that card and ultimately it didn't work out for him as close as he came, at least with second place in the race. But looking back on Oscar's season, we know it transformed with that pit stop phase at Monza, and that really set him back, mentally going into the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and then he had those the struggles with his car through Austin and Mexico. That was really where his season crumbled, from which he was not really able to recover going into these last few Grand Prix that we've had.
And just finally, Sam, you're our guy in this episode who's looking forward to 2026. He did it with Lando. You can now do it with Oscar. How does he, deal with this? Think about this, of what's gone on this year, having, looked dead certain to win the title at one point, to then obviously finishing third in the end. It's going to be a difficult thing, isn't it, for him to kind of, understand everything that's happened this season, the way things have unfolded against him, to be completely honest, obviously thinking to Baku in particular in the two crashes. How do you think he's going to now reset and approach next season?
I think it will be difficult, but I think we will see a return of the Oscar that we were, so big on earlier in the year, who looks so formidable, who looks so cool, calm and collected. And I think that he will be able to find that within himself, because that's still there. He is still that person. He is still that driver. And I said earlier in the year that I felt that this could be Lando's only chance to win the title, but it won't be Oscar's. And I don't know if I fully believe that still, because I think we'll see something different and renewed and refreshed from Lando because of this title now. But I think with Oscar, we always sensed that he was basically a champion in waiting, and he still is in waiting, now. But with Oscar, he is one of those drivers where you get the impression that there's so many in sports. There's so many teams or drivers or athletes who have to stumble before they eventually get into their championship window. And yes, his window is open, but he has stumbled at that first hurdle. He couldn't quite capitalize on it. He couldn't make it. He couldn't materialize that and win the title this year. But I think that will make him stronger. That will make him better, because he will learn so much from this. He's in a very, very different situation to, say, a Mark Webber, who was his, who is his manager. Mark was much older, much later in his career, against an up-and-coming talent that was Sebastian Vettel, in a very, very different team, in a very different environment. I think that Oscar will kick on from here. I think if you look back over the winter, how much Oscar came on from the end of 2023, from the end of 2024 into 2025. If you could imagine, even if he made half that jump into 2026, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. So I think that it will be difficult doing that soul searching, digging deep into what went wrong and why it went wrong and what he needs to do to change that. But I fully believe he'll be able to, and not only for the fact that there's a few things that we have already identified over the run-in that went wrong, like his comparative inability under low grip conditions that we saw in Austin and Mexico. That has already been identified, and that is the first thing you need to do to then actually deal with something and correct it. So he'll spend all winter looking at those kind of things, and you can believe that when he comes back in Australia, he will be, as I said, a force to be reckoned with.
And I guess you'll have to tune into the 2026 Formula 1 season to find out. Sam, Ian, amazing stuff as always. If you've been watching this podcast on YouTube, please be sure to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below your thoughts on the season finale, anything from the 2025 F1 season, and any questions you have from the last round, because we will be answering them, of course, in our Abu Dhabi Grand Prix fan questions video. The only thing left to say is thank you, and we will see you for next week's podcast. See you later.
In which we have a special guest star next week, folks, to look back on the season, so stay tuned for that one. Thanks as always for watching and listening. Take care until the next time.
Thanks for joining us as always.